Thank you for joining us at BATV's Falto Studios inside Batavia High School. My name is Kathy Balcazar, editor of the Kane County Chronicle, and I will be your host and moderator of Viewpoint. Viewpoint is a roundtable talk show that highlights a specific topic that is being discussed in our community. In today's show, we will discuss Fermilab and its 50th anniversary. Here to participate in this discussion are Steve Bryce, Fermilab Scientist and Neutrino Division Head, and Katie Yerkowitz, Fermilab Communication Director. Thank you for joining us today. All right, we will start with our first question. Katie, could you let us know how did Fermilab get started and why was Batavia chosen as its site?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having both of us on today. We're delighted to be here during our 50th anniversary year. So back in the 1960s, scientists across the country decided that they wanted to build a brand new physics machine, a particle accelerator, that was going to be better than anything else that existed in the world. And so they spent a few years developing plans, debating what kind of machine they wanted to build, and then eventually they decided on a design, and then the federal government, what became the Department of Energy, opened up proposals for where this machine should be built. And you might think that building a new physics machine wouldn't attract that much attention, but in fact it was a nationwide frenzy to bid on hosting this project. In fact, they got more than 90 proposals from cities and towns and states across the country to be the site of this new laboratory that would build this new machine. So they put together a big commission who went through all 90 proposals, narrowed it down, and eventually chose the site in Illinois that would become Fermilab. At the time, it was actually a town called Weston, Illinois, with parts also in DuPage and Kane counties. And then by 1967, the town of Weston had been emptied out, and the farmers that had lived around the site were also no longer there, and so then the site was turned over to the federal government to make the lab. And I think there were a number of reasons that made the Batavia, Kane, DuPage County, Weston site so attractive. One was its geology. So they really needed a site that had the nice, stable, flat, certainly helps geology to build a really, really big miles around particle accelerator. And the location in the country was also a big plus. It needed to be near a big city. It needed to be near major airports so that scientists from around the country could easily get there. And certainly being in the middle of the country was a big benefit because people from the East Coast and West Coast could both get there relatively easily.
Sure.
And it had a lot of support from the state too.
Awesome. Thank you very much. What were some of the first experiments undertaken at Fermilab, Steve?
So the site was initially, groundbreaking was in the late 60s, but the devices that we're talking about, these particle accelerators, are huge devices. They take years to put together. And so it was in the early 70s, 72 or 73, by the time, it took that long before we had experiments that we were doing there. An initial suite of experiments studying particle properties is what we initially launched with. And curiously, the very first experiment, experiment 1A, it's called. We don't have a great deal of imagination when it comes to naming our experiments. And for about 40 years, they were experiment 1, experiment 2, experiment 3. In recent years, we still number them, but we actually give them cute names as well, so they're more memorable. Anyway, experiment 1A was a neutrino experiment, which is, as I think we'll probably get into, the Fermilab's future. And in fact, it was at a time when we understood even less about neutrinos than we do now, and it was an experiment designed to measure how they interacted. We thought we had some indications about how they interacted, and we needed to pin that down. And so it was a collaboration of just 3 universities came together, the scientists, to build this experiment, and it was the very first one. The first in our long series. The experiment numbers now are over 1,000. Wow. So in that 50 years, we've had over 1,000 actual experiments, and many more proposals than that, because it's a competitive process to get an experiment mounted at Fermilab. And so based on largely on what we learned in those early years about neutrino properties, we've then actually gone on and done further experiments, not just in neutrinos, which is close to my heart, but in other particles too. And building on that and now understanding more and more about those particles.
Sure. Is some of the same equipment that was used, for example, for the 1A experiment even used today, or have we advanced so much technologically that that equipment wouldn't be used anymore?
I'm not entirely sure what was used, but I'm pretty sure it's not something that we would use now.
Sure.
It's an interesting question that the way that we advance with the science is partly by using new technologies, partly by developing new technologies. And so the kind of experiments we do now use technologies that didn't exist, by and large, didn't exist in the early 70s.
Sure, sure.
I will, it might be useful to talk a little bit about the types of machines we have, because our science, we really have two different types of machines. So we have the particle accelerators, which take the elementary particles, so the building blocks of matter, accelerate them, so make them go really, really fast, either just straight in a line or in a circle. And then we take those particles, once they've been accelerated to very high speeds or very high energies, smash them into something, basically, and then measure what comes out. And so when Steve's talking about experiment 1A, he's talking about using these accelerators to make a measurement at the end. And it's actually true that some of the components in the particle accelerators are still being used from the 1960s. And so we've been slowly upgrading them over time. We don't just have one particle accelerator, we actually have a chain of them. There's a handful that go in a circle until we can actually use the particles for experimentation. But yeah, so if you do take a tour of the lab, walk around the accelerators, you will see some things that look like they are definitely out of the late 60s, early 70s time period. So.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question, Katie, which is if you could describe what Fermilab looked like 50 years ago, both the campus at large and inside of the facility.
Okay, great. So 50 years ago was the beginning of the lab. So 1967 was the first year of the lab. That's why we're having our 50th anniversary now. But for the first year, the employees of the lab actually worked in an office tower in Oak Brook while they were waiting for the site to be ready. And so at the time, what they were doing, so this town of Weston was actually the beginning of a sort of big planned community. So before the site was chosen for the lab, there was this idea, and this developer had bought the land to build a huge planned community. It only gotten maybe a dozen or so houses built. And what they did was they took a lot of the farmhouses that were scattered around the site, moved them all over to where the Weston houses were, and started building some smaller technical shops, machine shops. And there was a big barn there that they decided to use for meeting space. So once employees moved to the Batavia site in 1968, they were all concentrated in what we now call the village and mainly used for housing people, but at the time was really the center of town. So people's offices were in little houses or in farmhouses. The all employee meetings and the meetings of the scientific visitors who would come in were held in this barn from, I think the 1800s. We still actually use it for events today. And there were lots of, again, shops and other technical space where they were starting to assemble some components. At the same time, and if you drive through the site today, you'll drive through the village. It's closer to the Warrenville side. Okay. So if you drive in on Pine Street and keep going, you'll see that area as you exit the site on the other side toward Warrenville. At the same time, they were starting to build the big particle accelerators and even the high-rise 16-story building that's now so iconic. That was beginning to be built around the end of the 60s, and so it basically would have been a construction site. They were building this 16-story concrete structure. They were digging the tunnels that the accelerators would go in, and so in one area you'd kind of have the village where everyone would be doing the work, and then in the other area you'd just have hard hats, machines, to build the infrastructure that would house everything.
Sure. How has Fermilab kept up with or even led technological advances over the decades, Steve?
So this is a sort of goes to the heart of how we do our experiments. So in some areas we develop new technologies in order to do our experiments that then have application elsewhere, and in other areas technologies developed elsewhere that then facilitate experiments that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And so it's a very much a a handoff between whether we're driving the technology or using the technology. A couple of examples, I think, where we've driven it and it's gone out into the wider world in order to accelerate the particles to the extremely high energies that we had needed to when we were operating the tevatron. We developed magnets which were very powerful. And in order to do that, we needed to develop superconducting technologies, particularly wire that can conduct electricity without losses. That then, having been developed for the tevatron, has application in MRI detectors and elsewhere where large magnetic fields are needed. Another area where and this is an area where there's very much an interplay between what we're driving and then what we end up using, is computing. So high-performance computing is something that our field, particle physics, was really driving in the 70s and 80s. And then, of course, computer revolution took place, and you know, we know that history. And now, when it comes to computing hardware, we're all making use of the computers which are developed for broader needs. But we've now moved into other areas of innovation where, for instance, large-scale computing, the internet, for instance. The internet originated at CERN, right, particle physics lab. And now we're also moving into areas where we're doing large distributed computing, using networks of computers all over the world to do calculations, the grid, we call it. So again, we've moved from an area, now that's a new area that we're innovating in that will then, I'm sure, find its place in the wider world and get used for, you know, all kinds of things. Sure. And so it's a very interesting interplay between areas where we're driving the technology and areas where we're using the technology that others have developed. And that's really how we make progress with these experiments.
Is there ever a time when Fermilab might be trying to develop its own technology and then poof, it comes out of the sky from somewhere else?
It's possible. Typically, we have a pretty good grasp on what's happening elsewhere. And so, you know, one of the things, for instance, that's very hot in our field right now is identifying different interaction types in particle physics using techniques developed by the likes of Google and Facebook for pattern recognition, you know, for you know, autonomous vehicles or all kinds of techniques there. So that's an area where we're really using the technology that's been developed elsewhere. And we can do that by maintaining good connections with those other areas of development.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time also to talk about our international collaboration because so Fermilab exists to do a specific type of science. You know, we do particle physics, which is the study of the elementary building blocks of matter and the forces that govern how they interact and make the universe. And this is really a global field. So there's a lot of people in the United States who work in this field, but there's also a lot of people in Europe and Asia. Steve mentioned CERN, which is near Geneva, Switzerland, and is another big center for particle physics. And Fermilab and CERN do a lot of collaborating. And so one of the great things about this field of science is that really everybody in some sense works together. It's all of the results of the science are published openly. There's lots of collaboration and meetings and communication. Lots of our partners work with us here. And so we know what technologies are being developed for all these different experiments around the world. And so there's a lot of back and forth, and everyone really does make use of everybody else's advances. Sure. So if we develop something here, it may well be used at CERN, or it may well be used in Japan, where they have another research facility, and vice versa, you know. The whole global community is all united in this quest to answer these big questions about the universe, and so everybody is really invested in helping each other get there. There's a little bit of competition, of course, as there always is, but I mean, you know, in reality, all the scientists want to answer these questions, and so they're all willing to collaborate and work together to make that happen.
Sure, sure. What are some of the larger achievements Fermilab has had over the years, and what would you say has been Fermilab's greatest success, Steve?
So, I said there's 1,000 experiments over 50 years. We've done an awful lot. And I also want to stress that we're a user facility. So we have people from all over the world come in and do these experiments. We have Fermilab scientists participating. But the majority of scientists on any given day working at Fermilab are probably coming from outside, not just across the US and across the world. So in those 50 years, I think there are 3 accomplishments that stand out for me, and you'll get a different answer from every Fermilab scientist. I say they'll probably agree on 2 of the 3 that I'm giving. But So we're all about particle physics, and a large part of that is discovering new particles and how they interact and how they fit in with the bigger picture. And Fermilab has had a huge amount of success in that realm. We have been the lab that's discovered 2 of the 6 types of quarks. Quarks are what make up protons and neutrons in the atomic nucleus, fundamental building blocks of matter. In the late 60s, we discovered what's known as the bottom quark, and the mid-90s, the top quark. And in fact, it's that top quark discovery using the Tevatron, our iconic collider, that is probably, up to now, Fermilab's crowning achievement. We'll get to what will be Fermilab's crowning achievement in 20 years in a minute. So I'd say that discovery of the top quark in the mid-90s, I think if you ask most people associated with particle physics what's Fermilab's crowning achievement, that's probably the answer they would give. The third one I would cite is something that's dear to my heart, which is the discovery of the 3rd type of neutrino. Neutrinos are also fundamental particles. They are building blocks of nature, come in 3 types. And the 3rd of those types, the tau neutrino, was discovered at Fermilab early in the 2000s, around the turn of the millennium. And that's what I would put up there on a similar footing. 3 of the small number of fundamental particles that exist in the universe, to the best of our knowledge. 3 of them discovered at Fermilab.
Could you pick your greatest achievement out of those 3?
I think to be honest, it's the top quark.
Even
though it's not a neutrino, it's the top quark, and it's for a variety of reasons. It was a sort of a crowning achievement in our investigation of the quarks, and the Tevatron, the device, the collider that we used to accelerate the particles, the particles that we collided, is a technological marvel. Was a technical, it's now been decommissioned, but for 20 years it was the pinnacle of our field. It was a fantastic machine, and as a piece of technology, until the LHC, completely unparalleled. The LHC is the collider at CERN that they use now.
And in some ways remains unmatched by the Large Hadron Collider in Europe. For example, the Tevatron collided matter and antimatter. So protons, which are a component of matter, went around one direction in the accelerator, and then antiprotons, which are antimatter, went around the other direction. And that's something that even CERN's collider does not match. They only collide matter. So for a long time, we held the crown of having produced the most antimatter on Earth. I think CERN, for different experiments, has now surpassed that. But that was another big achievement of the Tevatron.
Awesome. Well, we are learning so much about Fermilab, but we need to take a break. Viewpoint is brought to us by our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Tom Wangler, President of Confident Air. Regular maintenance can prolong the life of your furnace and keep your energy costs to a minimum. Plus, there's less of a chance of a breakdown on a cold winter night. Your furnace needs proper care and attention to keep it running smoothly, so you don't end up paying too much for heating during the cold winter months, or worse yet, with deadly carbon monoxide poisoning. We recommend an annual inspection to ensure safe operation. Confident Air, your trusted home comfort professionals since 1992.
Downtown Batavia, always moving by nature. Recreation, nature, the arts, specialty shops, restaurants and services. Downtown is everyone's neighborhood. Come, celebrate. Meet friends. Unwind.
See you downtown.
Janssen's Law Group has practiced law in Aurora since 1961 and in Batavia since 1994.
We focus our energy on representing people and businesses and families in the local community.
We represent clients in Kane and surrounding counties in matters ranging from divorce to wills, business law to zoning.
We focus our efforts on planning and working towards positive resolutions for businesses and families.
When clients need someone to fight for their interests, we're ready, willing, and able to act as aggressive advocates to protect their interests.
Drendel and Janssen's Law Group with offices in Batavia and Aurora.
The King County Chronicle is your best source for news and information in print and online in the Tri-Cities and Caneland.
This is Chronicle Country. This is Chronicle Country. This is Chronicle Country.
This is Chronicle Country.
This is Chronicle Country.
And we are back. Let's dive back into Fermilab by talking about the CERN Super Collider. With the CERN Super Collider taking the title of the world's largest and most powerful particle accelerator, what does Fermilab lay claim to in the scientific community today, Steve?
So Fermilab's big push now is neutrino physics. Neutrinos, like the quarks that make up the protons and neutrons within us, neutrinos are fundamental particles of nature, and they're fascinating. They have influence on all processes in the universe. They influence how galaxies evolve. They influence greatly how stars evolve, particularly how they die in supernova. They are fascinating particles. And so Fermilab's push, starting particularly a few years ago and will be culminating in the Dune experiment that we're in the process of building, is to study neutrinos, their properties, and how those properties influence the universe.
Excellent. Do you want to add anything to that, Katie?
Sure. I think in the shorter term, so the Dune experiment that Steve mentioned, we're very excited about because we actually just broke ground on this project a few days ago.
I saw a picture.
Both at Fermilab and in South Dakota, and I'm sure Steve will talk a little bit more about that.
I will say it was one of the coolest groundbreaking pictures I've ever seen since it was underground.
It was a mile underground, which we really wanted to make sure that could happen because, you know, how unique is that to have a groundbreaking underground? Was definitely, it was a logistical challenge to get all the VIPs down there and do all the speeches, but it was fantastic. But in the shorter term, some viewers might remember that a few years ago we trucked a huge piece of equipment from Long Island to Fermilab, and Steve's talked a lot about neutrinos. That piece of equipment is going to study a different building block of matter called a muon, which is like a heavy cousin of an electron that people might have heard about in their chemistry classes. And I just mentioned before the break that we used to make antimatter for the Tevatron, and in a great, Fermilab loves to recycle. You know, we want to use our equipment for as long as possible, so we actually recycled the whole area where we used to make antimatter to make these particles called muons. And so that big ring that we trucked through the suburbs is now installed and in place. It actually started running earlier this year, and we're going to be starting to study these muon properties, really in this case looking for brand new forces, brand new particles that we haven't seen before but we think might be out there. And so that will start, actually started this year, and then a couple of years from now we have another project with these muons that will start as well. And both of these will run during this time when we're building this big Illinois to South Dakota neutrino experiment. So we're very excited about that as well.
Awesome.
Fermilab has actually a pretty broad profile, pretty broad portfolio of experiments. We're heavily involved in the LHC at CERN through the CMS experiment. In fact, we're the second largest institution on the CMS after CERN itself. I've been involved for many years and will continue to be intimately connected to the Higgs discovery. It's one of our main thrusts. And we also have an array of smaller experiments studying particle astrophysics. So this is either using the cosmos as a laboratory to study particle physics, or looking for particles that we think are out there because of evidence that we get from looking at the universe. And so there's a pretty broad portfolio. We like to think of ourselves as having a flagship experiment or a flagship facility, which in the past was the Tevatron, in the future will be LBNF and Dune, but also having a suite of experiments surrounding that, because to be honest with you, you never know where the big discovery is going to come from. It may come from your billion-dollar undertaking, or it may come from a much smaller undertaking. Sure. And so having a broader portfolio is important in this sort of science.
Yeah. Where does Fermilab attract its scientists and other employees from, Katie?
So all across the country and around the world. In fact, both Steve and I are great examples of this. So I did not grow up in Illinois. I grew up in upstate New York, and the reason I'm here is because of Fermilab. You know, I do science communication, used to do science, now I do science communication, and this is one of the great places in the U.S. to do it. Steve obviously is not from Northern Illinois, but originally was born in the U.K. Even in the communication office at Fermilab, I work with people who come from California, quite a few people who were born in Illinois, and also someone from Germany, someone from Italy. So it's really a great place to work, and we hope also good for the community that we bring people really from around the world to work at the laboratory. We have 1,800 employees at Fermilab, so we get questioned a lot how many people work there. And unlike what many people assume, they're not mostly scientists. So Steve mentioned earlier that we are a user facility, and so what that means is that the main role of Fermilab and the employees of Fermilab is to provide scientific equipment that scientists from across the country and around the world can use. And so that means we do have about 300 PhD physicists who not only carry out their own research, but also have responsibility for coming up with new ideas for equipment, helping design it, making sure that the equipment is maintained and operated for other scientists to use. So in addition to our 1,800 employees, we also have 4,000 scientists from across the country and around the world who use our equipment. They may use it from afar, they may use our computing equipment, or they may actually come to the lab. So in addition to our 300 physicists, we also have about 250 engineers, about 250 computing professionals, about 250 technicians who are really the folks that are making sure our one-of-a-kind unique equipment is being built, it's being maintained, it's being operated, and then of course we have all sorts of other job categories, accountants, people who run our village housing, those kinds of people that are needed to make the lab run. So when I'm out talking to community members, I always like to make the point that you don't have to go through graduate school in physics to be able to work at Fermilab, because we really do need many different kinds of job categories to make the lab run and make science go forward.
If there's an opening at Fermilab, and I would guess that the answer to this would depend on which level of employee it would be, is that position so desirable that Fermilab doesn't need to go out on its own to recruit people, that people will just apply for it? Or do you often have to recruit people for the right position?
It's really position dependent. In some cases, we don't have to do as much recruitment. For example, we do have to recruit some particle physicists, but also there's only so many places in the world
exactly,
that can work, frankly. I will say that one of the places we have to recruit most heavily is computing professionals.
Okay.
There are lots of computing jobs at lots of attractive companies like Google and others. And so, we are often on the hunt for people to fill those positions because there tends to be a lot of turnover in the area. So it really does kind of depend on jobs. I know technicians as well. We're often hiring technicians.
But we do hire extensively from the local area. I mean,
yes,
we bring in, our users come from worldwide, our scientists tend to, and engineers.
Right.
But those are as Katie said, the majority of people working at Fermilab are not scientists or engineers and are hired locally. So we're very proud of being an Illinois institution, as well as being a worldwide institution.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know, if you're a new employee at Fermilab, how do you get introduced to the facility?
That's a great question.
Well, on your first day, sometimes you get welcomed by me.
Okay.
Often by our chief operating officer, our director. Sometimes I fill in. We make sure. So we actually offer weekly free tours for the public every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And so we will invite our new employees, or strongly encourage our new employees, to actually go on that tour, because it's a great introduction to the science of the lab. Now, if the new employee happens to be a scientist, chances are they'll actually have been to the lab before and probably have some familiarity. But for many of our employees, this is not only their first experience with Fermilab, but their first experience with that kind of environment. It's a government-owned, private contractor-operated facility whose sole job is to make sure that we can support, scientific discovery, which is a pretty unique.
I mean, think of it as a strange mix of a university environment and a heavy industrial environment, all merged together.
With some government thrown in on top of that.
Exactly. So, and there's so much happening on the site, and the site is so large that it takes people a while to get there, get a feel for what's happening where, and we do go to some lengths to help them slot in, because it's such a, they may not have been prepared by their previous employment for the work.
I know the location's much bigger than my office, so it probably takes a while to get your bearings.
So the whole site is 6,800 acres. And we have hundreds of buildings. Many of them are small buildings that no one has an office in, but, and they have often very imaginative names that are, composed of a number and a letter. And so people have to find their way around. The communication office is right on the main floor of the high-rise building, and we'll often get people coming in saying, can you please tell me where this building is, because I'm supposed to be there for my...
Now.
An hour ago.
So we are happy to show people where to go.
Sure. Katie, what events does Fermilab have planned to celebrate its anniversary?
Right. So we have been celebrating our anniversary all year, actually. We started in January. We had a kickoff event at one of our art series events. So there was a Mukapatsa, which is a Chicago-based band, came, and we had a kickoff party with some sort of hands-on science stuff beforehand. We've been celebrating all summer with actually going out to local fairs and festivals. So Fermilab had a booth at Windmill City Fest a couple weekends ago. We'll actually be back for Bat Fest in October. We'll have a booth there as well. But our biggest event will be Saturday, September 23rd. So on that day, we will have our biggest open house in 20 years. We haven't had a big open house like this since 1997. We're going to be opening many areas of the lab to behind the scenes tours. These are areas that you wouldn't see even if you came for one of our weekly or monthly tours. We are going to have multiple locations that will have a lot of hands-on science for both kids and adults to do. We'll be having science shows. Mr. Freeze, who lots of folks will have seen before, will be there, but we'll also have remote connections to labs in South Dakota, in Europe, even South America, where we have some equipment on a telescope down there. So we're really trying to make this a great event, and that will be starting at 10 a.m. and going till 4 p.m. on Saturday, September 23rd. Starting in early August, we'll open registration for the event, and people will be able to go there, go find out more information and register by going to 50.fnal.gov.
All right.
So please go to the Fermilab website. You can also just Google Fermilab and you will find our website, and there'll be information on there. So we're really looking forward to welcoming lots of people from the area.
I've been to Fermilab before for one of its open houses, and if I'm not mistaken, you do also have to register specifically for one of the tours. Is that correct?
In this case, we will not have online registration. So what we'll be doing when people arrive, there will be a couple of places that will be ticketed. There'll be lots of tours that are not. But we're actually going to be providing tickets for Mr. Freeze's shows, and also to go up to the 15th floor of our main building, which is our exhibit area and also a great view of the surrounding area. We'll be giving tickets, but people will be able to pick those up when they get to the event.
All right, excellent. How does Fermilab connect with the community, both in terms of the work undertaken there and in terms of giving back to the community or providing other offerings to area residents, Katie?
We have a lot of ways that people can engage with the community, and Steve, I'm sure we'll have to make notes of ones that I missed.
You kick off, I'll jump in.
Go through this. So one of the commitments the lab has had for all of its 50 years is really to make sure that local residents and people from the northern Illinois and Chicagoland areas can use the facility, use the grounds, and that we're really offering opportunities for them to learn and be inspired. So the first easy way that anyone can make use of Fermilab is actually just to stop by. So we are open 365 days a year from 8 a.m. to either 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. depending on if it's winter or summer. And you can come in, visit our public areas, walk your dog. We actually have an off-leash dog training area. You can ride your bike. Lots of local bikers will know us from having taken a tour through Fermilab, and lots of people do come through every day, especially when it's nice out. We have prairie trails that people can walk on. You can fish in our ponds as long as you have an Illinois state license.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the easiest way. And starting a couple of years ago, we also opened up our main Wilson Hall, our main 16-story building, up to self-guided tours. So if you come Monday to Sunday, every day of the week, you can come in, you can sign in with our receptionist, and then go up to the 15th floor, which is at our exhibit area, learn a little bit about the lab, watch some videos, and actually look around the local area. It's a pretty great view. In addition to self-guided tours, we also offer, I mentioned, weekly guided tours. They are free, they are drop-in, no registration necessary, every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Once a month on Sundays, so the first Sunday of every month in the afternoon, there is a tour and lecture program. So you get to hear a lecture on a different scientific topic every month. You get to go on a tour, and then you get to ask scientists whatever questions you may have. That requires registration. In addition to those, we have an education office, an education center that have lots of educational programming for kids. They have actually a drop-in hands-on science center you can go to 6 days a week. They're closed on Sundays. And then they have lots of field trip programs, tour programs. So you can, again, go to the Fermilab website, and it's all on there. You can find out what kind of programs we offer. And then on
we recently did a calculation of how many people we touch. Right,
yes, we did. So I'll get to that after I talk about the lab.
You probably needed a supercomputing device to determine that.
We did, actually.
It was a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. And then the last thing that we do that's a bit unusual for a science facility is that for more than 30 years, we've had an arts series that goes on at the lab. So we have an 850-seat auditorium, and every year from September to May, just like a normal art series season, we bring in musical acts, plays, dance performances, and those are, there's a schedule you can consult online, and you can come in and visit one of those things. And then we also have a science lecture series, about 10 lectures a year on Friday nights, and those are not just about our science. So we actually only give a lecture maybe once or twice a year on physics. The rest is all sorts of other things, mathematics, robotics. This year we'll have a lecture on going to Mars from one of the NASA scientists, so it's a really great program. As Steve said, we recently added up how many people came to our site in 2016, or that we engaged through these programs, and it was about 93,000 people.
Wow.
So we also go out to the community. I mentioned that we have been going to summer fairs and festivals and those types of things. Okay, Steve,
what did she leave out?
So I think the only thing I would add was our connection to local businesses, because we do a lot of, we have a lot of contracts with local businesses for all kinds of things through the site. We do, and particularly in recent years, a lot of construction on site. And in fact, that's going to be continuing for the next little while. And a lot of those people, the contractors that we're bringing on site to do various things, are all local businesses. And so like I said, we're very proud of being a location in Illinois, and we're proud of playing a significant role in the community. So I think it's the only thing I would add.
We do have internship programs as well, which, and I know Steve in particular is involved with one internship program with a local community college to train technicians.
Yeah, so this is something that we started, thank you for the reminder, this is something that we started a couple of years ago. We have an interesting problem at Fermilab with, we did a lot of hiring of technicians through the 70s, and a lot of hiring out of the military, a lot of Vietnam vets. And the lab was pretty much built, most of the experiments, by that sort of Vietnam vet era.
Yeah.
Those people are now all retiring. And so we have a turnover, and what we're finding is that going to the veterans community is very productive for us, because these are people who work well in our environment. They have a skill set that's very relevant to us. A lot of them were trained in the military, looking after motor pools or that kind of thing, that translates into to the kinds of things that they're doing with us. And so we form partnerships with local community colleges to offer internships with the aim of, the intent of future employment to local military veterans, and with the idea that that's our new generation of technicians that we're gonna bring up. And so we've sort of gone from a situation where the lab was sort of built and largely run through Vietnam vets, and that's Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are now going to build our future. And it's again, it's something that we're proud of. We're proud of the fact that we can connect with the community, and we're not an ivory tower. We're an institution that's firmly embedded in the local community.
Yeah. Katie, would you mind repeating that website again in case people want to find out more about how to get involved?
Sure. So our main website is FNAL, so that stands for Fermi, National Accelerator Laboratory.gov. And from there, you can really navigate anywhere else you'd like to go if you want to learn about our education programs or our science. And then if you want to specifically find out about our September 23rd open house, you just have to put a 50 in front of the .fnal.gov.
All right.
To get to that site.
Thank you very much. And Steve, what is the future of Fermilab? Let's talk about it.
Okay. So we talked about the Tevatron. 20 years, it was the iconic facility at Fermilab. For the next 20 years, starting a few years from now, 20 or 30 years, it'll be LBNF. The Long Baseline Neutrino Facility, which is a facility that we'll build at Fermilab to create a beam of neutrinos. We already create beams and send them relatively short distances. This beam we're going to send to South Dakota, 1,300 kilometers. to a facility that we're also building, and that's where the groundbreaking was last week, in an old gold mine in South Dakota. The overall facility is called LBNF. The experiment that we're going to build in that facility is called DUNE, and it's going to study neutrinos. It's going to further our knowledge of the properties of these particles, and thereby further our knowledge of how they're interacted with the universe and connected to the way the universe evolved. And it's also going to be it's been described as the first mega science project, international mega science project on US soil. And so it is breaking ground in a number of different ways, particularly with our connection to the international community and our partnerships that we're building with other countries in order to get this project built. So it's going to be Fermilab's future. We're very excited about it, and we've got now on board a lot of support. I think you saw a lot of that support at the groundbreaking event we had last week, and growing support in the rest of the world as well. And so it's something that we're very excited about.
Is there a particular part of that experiment that you're really excited about?
So I am a neutrino physicist.
Yep.
This is my thing. Yep. And so the thing that excites me is the detector technology. We're using a new type of technology, something that we're prototyping on site now, using liquid argon. So this is a noble gas, but it's in liquid form, so it's very cold. And we use huge volumes of that because neutrino interactions are rare, and you have to put a lot of mass in the way of them to see these interactions. And it's a technology where we can image the interactions and what comes out of them and read them out and study them. These detectors that we're going to build, eventually we'll have 4 of them, each of which is going to be about 20,000 tons, a little less than 20,000 tons. So these are enormous, in cavities a mile underground. So the scale of this is pretty much unprecedented, and is going to involve, we talked earlier about pushing boundaries of technology. Well, this is going to push a different set of boundaries in technology, and is also going to teach us about neutrino properties at a level that we've never learned before. So we're very excited.
As this project takes off, will you yourself be traveling from Illinois to South Dakota quite frequently?
I certainly will. I was there just 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
3 weeks ago, and I expect to be there pretty often. So this is the site is in the Black Hills in South Dakota. It's beautiful there. In the Home State gold mine. It used to be the most productive gold mine in the U.S. Was shut down a few years ago. It's been taken over by a South Dakota authority with South Dakota Science and Technology Agency to build facilities deep underground for doing, in particular, DUNE, but actually there's a variety of experiments that really benefit from that great depth. The reason you go so deep is that on the surface we're constantly showered by cosmic rays from the cosmos. You go deep, you get rid of that, it's shielded out by the dirt, and you can do very precise experiments without having all these other particles going through your detector. Yeah. And so it's something that is coming together now. We had the groundbreaking for the facility last week, and we're very excited working with our international partners to be able to pull it off.
Yeah. Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about the future of Fermilab? Anything to add?
Boy, Steve pretty much summarized it.
Yep.
I mean, it is really fantastic to see this project moving forward. The science collaboration that will use the long baseline neutrino facility and those huge detectors now has almost 1,000 people from 30 countries, and this is an experiment that won't start running for at least 8 years. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing to see the kind of interest that's already been generated by a project that's really ramping up. And so in addition to the neutrino facility, as Steve mentioned, we also have a broad program, and so many other things are moving along as well. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of and interested in and love to tell stories about is our growing effort to connect the technology that we create on site to other uses. So for example, we're really at the forefront of a certain type of particle accelerator technology, so a new technology that allows us to accelerate particles much more efficiently in a much smaller space. And so we're investigating, together with a number of partners, ways to use that technology for industry or for environmental cleanup or to sterilize food or medical supplies or to clean up wastewater. There are we tend to talk about particle accelerators like the ones that Fermilab has, which are huge, and there's only a few of them. But really, there's more than 30,000 particle accelerators that work every day in industry. They're used to make tires thinner. They're used to cure inks on cereal boxes. They're actually used to make the shrink wrap that goes on Butterball turkeys. But they tend to be 1970s technologies. And so we're trying to work with some interested companies and interested nonprofit and educational partners to explore uses of more modern particle accelerator technologies. Wow. And so that's an effort that began at Fermilab really in earnest a number of years ago. And so there's a lot of work going on in that space, and I think that's really, really interesting. The science, of course, is fascinating, but there's also ways that the technologies that we develop can be used in different areas. And so that's very interesting to see and to follow.
I'm never going to look at a frozen turkey the same way
right.
again.
That's right.
All right, so we're to the end of our conversation, so I'm going to ask you each for your final thoughts. Steve?
I think I would just, I want people to get a sense of the excitement of what we do at Fermilab, to feel like we are, as I've said a couple of times, very much an Illinois institution. We're not an ivory tower. We welcome people on site, and you know, encourage people to attend this open house. It's going to be a fantastic event.
Awesome. Katie, how about you?
I certainly encourage people to attend the open house on September 23rd, starting at 10 a.m., but also to engage with us throughout the year. Like I said, we have so many different ways that you can come on site to view our bison, which is definitely the way most people around here know us. Either they've come to visit the bison or they went on a field trip when they were in school. We bring about 10,000 students a year through on field trips, so a lot of people have visited us that way. But really encourage people to come out, or if they see us at a local summer fair or a festival, stop by and chat with us and ask us what's going on, and we'll be able to tell you about things coming up that you might be interested in attending.
Awesome. Well, thank you to you both for being on this episode of Viewpoint. To watch previous episodes of Viewpoint, you can go to the BATV website at mybatv.com. If you have a topic you would like to see discussed on a future episode of Viewpoint, you can contact us at 630-937-5413 or by email at info@mybatv.com. I'm Kathy Balcazar. See you next time on Viewpoint.